when it comes to these hormones, they get into the blood and they are transported around. The way in which they travel around does vary. Some hormones we are going to see are water soluble, some are not, some are lipid soluble. Because of that, we have to have different transportation mechanisms for those. So some we will see here can travel freely within the blood. Some need an escort. Then, depending upon whether they are water or lipid soluble, will depend upon their ability to get in and cause an effect. All right. Whatever the case, there is always going to be receptors involved, whether these are receptors externally on the plasma membrane, or these are going to be some kind of receptor located, within a nucleus or within the cytoplasm, even for that regard. Hormones love to bind to receptors, and they will always bind to receptors in a very specific fashion, specific shape. Hormone, specific shaped receptor. They also bind with what is referred to as high affinity. They have a strong bond, and it's a specific bond. Again, this is high affinity. Hormones love to bind to receptors with a very high affinity. So this means that when they do bind, they bind, okay? And they bind with a strong affection to one another, okay? Saturating all of these receptors. All right, so as you can kind of see, we have two major types of hormones. Lipophilic and water soluble. Those that are lipid soluble, those that are water soluble. Water soluble hormones, these receptors are always going to be on the outside of the plasma membrane. Okay. Water soluble are always going to have their receptors on the surface of the plasma membrane, facing the blood. Lipophilic, because they are lipid soluble, these receptors can be found in the cytoplasm or in the nucleus. So depending upon if we are a water-soluble hormone or a lipid-soluble hormone, gives me a different mechanism for action. One binds to receptors that are found out on the outer surface, and some are found, again, in the cytoplasm or in the nucleus. If I look at just lipophilic steroid hormones, okay, thyroid hormones are in this same clump as well. But if we just look at steroid hormones, all right, they have to be escorted. Okay, again, they need a transport mechanism. Right? They don't like to interact with the water, so they need an escort. They need a transport mechanism. Again, water soluble loves to interact with the water, so they travel that way. Once they get to the target cell, then they disassociate. They leave the escort, they leave the carrier protein, and they can then diffuse easily across the plasma membrane. Why? They're lipophilic, okay? So they can easily go within. Receptors can be found, again, like I just mentioned, in a couple different regions. They can be found within the nucleus, or they can be found within the cytoplasm. If they are found within the nucleus itself, these have a tendency to just activate genetic transcription, start reading the DNA to create ultimately a protein. Okay. So these produce new hormones, produce new proteins, okay, which usually kind of kicks in a metabolic effect. Right? And if we look at our example here, here's our lipid-soluble hormone, testosterone as an example, diffuses across the plasma membrane once it's escorted here, and diffuses into the nucleus, binding to a receptor, which triggers transcription of the DNA. Coding for a specific gene that, again, makes a specific protein and causes a specific response. Okay. These can also be referred to as genomic. This can be referred to as a genomic action, okay, where we stimulate this genetic transcription. Genomic action. Triggering transcription. And if we can trigger transcription, obviously we can make a protein. The other way is non-genomic. It stays out in the cytoplasm. Non-genomic. Non-genomic action is in the cytoplasm. Okay. This is not as common. Because I don't have to go into the nucleus and unzip the DNA and cause transcription before I can get translation. This goes out into the cytoplasm only. So this non-genomic action can happen a heck of a lot faster. Generally in just a couple minutes, a few minutes, 2 to 3 minutes, we can get some kind of response by the cell. So it's a heck of a lot faster. When it comes to these type of receptors, we'll see it generally involves a secondary messenger type of system here. So here I have, there's my carrier, disassociates, gets inside to the cell here, causes transcription, right? Which then can cause me to translate, involved in making a protein synthesis, okay? And I get whatever my effector protein is, okay? We can see if I go that, here you can see I can have a receptor protein here for a steroid hormone as well, just out in the cytoplasm. I can bind to it out there as well, and I can bind to specific sites on a DNA sequence there and get some more reading to occur as well. All right. And that would be out in the cytoplasm, okay? The vast majority of steroid hormones, of lipid-soluble hormones, are the genomic action factor, okay? They dissolve in, go to the nucleus, cause transcription, ultimately causing translation, making a protein, all right? If the protein's out there, and more of this testosterone, for example, comes on in, we can bind to some receptors as well that can be found in the cytoplasm at this point now, and it can go and attach to the transcribed to the messenger RNA and cause some even more transcription process. What about water-soluble hormones? Okay. Water-soluble hormones cannot get across the plasma membrane very easily at all. Okay. So they need to bind to a receptor on the outside surface there. And there you can see the example. Okay. Antidiuretic hormone. Water-soluble has to kick in a secondary messenger system. All right. Specific shape, specificity, binds to it, uncouples the G protein coupled receptor. That activates a secondary messenger system. And we're just going to look at cyclic AMP, phospholipase C, tyrosine kinase. Those are a couple other ones as well. The book goes into them. I'm only going to ask you about cyclic AMP. all right? But you can see there, my second messenger, booyah, okay? This is happening on the inside now. So here, bind to the receptor, disassociate my G protein coupled, my G protein receptor here, activated adenylate cyclase to, facilitate the formation of cyclic AMP. Cyclic AMP then goes and causes proteins to be made. Okay. Activates an enzyme to cause activation of a protein, which again gives me my cellular response. Secondary messenger systems we'll see with epinephrine and norepinephrine. It's adrenergic receptors, beta adrenergic receptors. And if we remember back to beta adrenergic receptors, we have a couple different types, B1 and B2, beta 1, beta 2. In the heart, beta 1, I believe, that increases heart rate, that increases force of contraction. Beta 2 receptors, they cause vasodilation within skeletal muscles. So that allows a heck of a lot more blood flow into a skeletal muscle to respond to an increase in metabolic demand. Causes the bronchioles to dilate within the lungs. So smooth muscle relaxes there as well. So, in one respect, it can stimulate, and another one, it can inhibit. And again, that's the difference between beta 1 and beta 2. Okay. But again, it's a G protein coupled, receptor, G protein coupled reaction here. Activate adenylate cyclase to make cyclic AMP. Okay. Just highlight a few things that I'd probably ask about. Again, cyclic AMP activates a specific enzyme. Okay. Just protein kinase. And that helps us to activate proteins within the cytoplasm to engage a specific cellular response. And here's a picture of that. Okay. A much more simplistic version of it, I guess, compared to the other one I showed. Activation of specific enzymes or an inactivation of specific enzymes, just depends. Beta 1, beta 2. Okay. A lot of good multiple choice type questions here on these first few things here. Okay. I wouldn't necessarily ask a short answer question per se from these first few sections here that we've looked at. Right? When we start looking at specific hormones here and glands and whatnot, and they secrete, we'll hint at some of this activity, but we'll dive into, the secondary messenger systems a heck of a lot more when we get into the specific organ systems where we're going to be talking about that, like in the heart, in the lungs, kidneys, stuff like that.